بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم أما بعد فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه العزيز بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ومن الناس من يشتري لهو الحديث ليضل عن سبيل الله بغير علم ويتخذها هزوا أولئك لهم عذاب مهين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Alhamdulillah, just a reminder for all of us, me sitting here doesn't necessarily make me someone special, right? Everything that we have, all of us sitting in this gathering, it is a blessing from Allah Azza wa Jal. It is only from the tawfiq of Allah Azza wa Jal. What is the dua of the Prophet? وَمَا تَوْفِيقِي إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. That everything that we have, the kalima, the health that we have, the aql that we have, the understanding that we have, the fact that we're able to take time out of our day and come and worship Allah Azza wa Jal is solely from the tawfiq of Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? So when we understand this, that Allah is the one who controls everything. The hadith of Rasulullah indicates and gives us and shows that every single heart of a believer is in the hands of Allah Azza wa Jal. If Allah wants, He can misguide that person. If Allah wants, He can continue to guide that person. So first and foremost, we make sure to Allah that Allah has given us the tawfiq to come and remember Him. Where angels are such where they remember, they come looking for these gatherings and they go to Allah and they tell Allah Azza wa Jal that so and so is remembering you. Right? So first, what's our responsibility is to make sure to Allah Azza wa Jal. And now specifically in regards to this topic, why I chose it is we're living in a time, if we ask ourselves in regards to specifically music, right? It's everywhere, right? If you go to the restaurants, you hear music. If you go to elevators, you hear music inside the elevator. You go to, you even go to bathrooms and there's music. People driving or passing by, there's music in their cars, right? So music is such where it has pretty much became so involved and engrossed in society that some people take it as a necessity in life, right? So as Muslims, what is our responsibility? How do we counter that, right? If you look in the past, the prophets that were sent to the nations, right? Let's take an example of Lut alayhi salam, right? He was sent to the people, and the nation that he was sent to, the problem that they had was the problem of homosexuality. Now imagine if Lut alayhi salam addressed his nation and he spoke to them regarding alcohol. The people would be supporting him. Because why? He wasn't necessarily addressing the problem that they were facing. But rather, Lut alayhi salam directly addressed their problem that they were facing, the main problem, which was the problem of homosexuality. Because of that, Lut alayhi salam the society rejected him. And they cursed him and they bothered him. Similarly, let's take the example of the people of Madian. If I ask people in the crowd, who was sent to Madian? Anyone want to give it a shot? وَإِلَىٰ مَدْيَنَ أَخَاهُمْ شُعَيْبًا, right? And what was the problem with the people of Shu'aib? They had the problem of what? Cheating in business. Right? They were cheating in business. So Shu'aib, when he went to the people of Madian, he addressed them regarding that problem. Where he said, لَا تَنْقُصُوا الْمِكْيَالَ وَالْمِيزَانَ. He says, don't cheat in business. So if Shu'aib did not necessarily talk to the people regarding the problem that they were facing, then he would have been known as a respected person at their time. But because he addressed them with the very problem that they had, they didn't like him for that. So now, coming back and making it practical to our times, as Muslims, having this kalima la ilaha illallah, we have to address every single thing that we are facing nowadays. And one of the main things that is facing us is the problem of music. It's everywhere. So how do we react to that? What should we do? Right? If you go back all the way, at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, prior to him becoming a Nabi, he was known as what? As-Sadiq, Al-Amin. People trusted him. People knew that he was respected. People had honor for him. People considered him as a noble person. But once this Nubuwwat came, once this Prophet came, then they were stuck. Why? Because this very person in society who they thought was a person of truth, a person of honor, a person of self-esteem, a person known as trustworthy. But now, he starts telling the people, you can only believe in what Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? So they had this problem of being polytheists, mushrikeen, believing in so many idols. So now the problem is wait. If we used to call this person amongst us as a trustworthy person, as a truthful person, someone who is noble. Now he's calling people to what Allah Azza wa Jal. We can't call him crazy. They try calling him crazy. The Quran mentions that they try to call him possessed, or they try to call him crazy. But deep down inside, these mushrikeen, these Quraysh, they knew that they couldn't do this. There was no effect because before him becoming a prophet, before calling to Allah Azza wa Jal, they respected him and honored him. So now there's a problem. What do? How can they try to counter the call of Islam. What are they going to do? So one man stands up from the Quraysh. Right? He said, a businessman by the name of Nadir bin Harith. Has anyone heard this name, Nadir bin Harith? So this Nadir bin Harith, he tells the Quraysh that before the Prophet of Allah becoming the Prophet of Allah, you accepted him in society. You accepted him as a noble person. Now you can't call him a crazy person. Now you can't take that. You can't necessarily change your claim. So he said, how are you going to come back and how are you going to counter his call of Islam, the Tawheed of Allah Azza wa Jal? How are you going to combat the Quran? So what does he say? He says, let me take the responsibility of trying to combat the Quran of Allah Azza wa Jal, the Kalam of Allah Azza wa Jal. So he goes, and he goes to Persia, and he goes to Faris, and he goes up. And he comes back with musical instruments. And he comes back with ladies singing. And what does he do? He starts going to people. He starts going to people, and he starts telling people, whoever he hears and sees that they're listening to the Quran, what does he do? He quickly goes to them. He gives them food. He starts playing musical instruments. Right? He has the ladies singing for them. Why? An attempt to lead them astray. The Quran says, لِيُضِلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. An attempt so that they can become astray from the path of Allah. Right? And this, to a certain extent, when he was able to prevent some people from becoming Muslim. So this was his goal. To counter Quran, he was using music. The Quran mentions, the young child who recited the Quran, the same ayah I recited, that those people from amongst you who purchase lahu al-hadith. And if you look at the Mufassirun, Ibn Abbas, right? If you look at Ibn Mas'ud, Ibn Abbas, Dhahak, all these Mufassirun and more, they agree that lahu al-hadith over here is referring to music. So this Nadir bin Harith, when he came, he purchased music. He came back with the poetry of the people of the past. An attempt to misguide the people from the path of Allah, to divert them, to delude them from the kalima la ilaha illallah, to divert them to an attempt to distract them from the Quran of Allah, from the Kalam of Allah. And this continued, and this still continues. Take that and now come all the way to the 21st century and apply it to our times, right? Everything that we're living in is a time which music revolves about everything. And if you look nowadays, Hollywood, Bollywood, etc., is the biggest Nadir bin Harith. Right? The whole purpose behind putting the music out there in society is لِيُضِلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Right? So that they can distract people from the path of Allah Azza wa Jal. So that they can keep them from far from the obedience of Allah Azza wa Jal. Why? First, going into, right, what is the reason why society, the people nowadays, the governments, the industry, Hollywood industry, why do you see music everywhere? The psychology of music is very interesting. Right? I'll give you an example. So, music is a very broad field, right? Without going into too much details, there's an idea in music of quiet music and loud music. So I'll give you an example. When we're in the elevator, you hear music, right, in the background, but we don't necessarily pay that much attention to it. Why? That's considered as music which is background music. So these scientists, these psychologists, they know that sometimes if a person try being in a room by yourself, right? Or try being in an elevator by yourself. Or sometimes on the phone even, right? If you have no music, you'll feel eerie. You'll feel uncomfortable. So that is known. They put that music there as background music. So if you're waiting in line, for example, let's say I'm waiting in line, I'm trying to buy something. Scientifically, it's proven that if there's no background music, a person will become more impatient. He'll realize, wait a second, I'm waiting too long. But it's proven that this music that they put over there, it kind of diverts a person, and it makes him feel as if he's not waiting that long. Same thing with the elevator. The music in the elevator is just there so that you don't feel like you're waiting too long. And the same thing with the phone. When you put on customer service, the line, what happens? They give you that music. Imagine if that music wasn't there after 2 minutes, oh my God, why is it taking so long? But that music is there, and it's subconsciously, background music is making you feel like it's not a long wait. So these industries nowadays, they know that music has an impact on society, right? If you look at science, we all have insan, Allah created as such where we have a brain, right? In this brain is something known as the limbic system, right? What is the limbic system? The limbic system in the brain is responsible for our emotions. It's responsible for our responses, our emotional responses. It's also responsible for our mood, right? It's also responsible for our long-term memory. Now, if you look at music, When music is played, it affects every single part of the limbic system. It tackles every single thing. Number one, the control of emotions. If you have music that's loud, it makes a person cheerful and happy. If you have a classical music, what happens? A person feels sad and serious. So now that's music. It's affecting our brain, right? Then in regards to our mood, like I mentioned, if you have hype music, if you have music which has a lot of beats to it, what happens? We're in the zone, we're feeling it. We're happy, we're motivated. And then when it comes to sad and classical music, we're sad, right? But that soft music, what happens? We become sad. So this is society, the scientists, the psychologists, they're conducting experiments on people to see how they react to music, right? We're going to discuss later on what are the spiritual harms in regards to this. But this is scientifically proven. Obviously, Islam is not necessarily based on science, but science is a component. Meaning, if science is saying this, then we have to consider this, that music affects our brain. Just like how you have drugs. The same way drugs affect our brain, music also affects our brain. So that's why you will see, right? You will see that music and sex and intercourse and in regards to drugs, all these things, what they release, what happens when a person indulges in that, a substance in the body is released known as dopamine, right? So dopamine is known as a good feeling hormone. What does that mean? Sometimes we all work, right? We all work, and then after having a hard day at work, we feel happy. We get that feeling that we accomplished something. That body's releasing that dopamine, that good feeling. So similarly also, what happens when a person listens to music, your body's releasing dopamine. But what's the problem here? The problem here is that your body's not necessarily doing anything. So it's like the music is hacking your brain. And similarly with drugs also, that the more it's scientifically proven, the more effort you put into something, the more you feel good, right? When a person, he has like a 6-year course, or when he finishes college, or when he finally gets that investment in business, that sometimes you feel higher, you feel much more happier that day, because this is a bigger achievement. So the more higher the achievement, the more effort you put into something, the more your body releases dopamine, so you can feel good about it. But what's the problem with music and drugs? What's the problem? You're not putting any effort, you're sitting back, and then your body's releasing dopamine, you're feeling good. So now your body naturally wants that. I want to feel good. So now you keep going back to it. Listen to more. I want to experience that more and more. So now you're addicted. That's what happens with drugs, right? And that's what happens in society, right? If you look nowadays, this is another topic for itself, the harms of addiction. Now, how does it start? It starts with a little bit, and then it leads to more and more and more. Your body wants that, it's craving it. So that's what music does to you. It gets you addicted, right? And then if you look at another harm in regards to music, right? It is known that it affects our emotions. So now you have emotion on one side and you have reason on the other side. And in science, emotion is on one side and reason is separate. So when you're playing music, now it messes up your judgment. You don't necessarily know what you're doing. Sometimes you make a wrong decision. Why? Because now you're basing your acts on your emotion. And your emotion response comes first. Easy example I'll give you is, let's say, there's a famous example, if you look at the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, right? That a mother would put herself in harm's risk for her child, right? And that's something which is what? Sometimes she will put herself over the child. So that is an emotional response, not necessarily a logical response, right? Where a mother would give her life for her child, or sometimes she would do something rash, right? Why? Because her emotional response is kicking in first, compared to her logical response. And that's what the hadith of Rasul teaches us, that controlling your anger matters the first time. When we get angry, what's our response? We scream back, right? So that is our emotional response, not necessarily a logical response. So this is what music does to us. That music, it affects our emotional and logical response. That we're not necessarily making the right decisions. So that's what happens. That's another thing that music does to us, right? Then you have the famous, or I should say, infamous, Charles Darwin, the Darwin theory. So he has mentioned that what music does to you is it activates your sexual desires. And this is what it does. It activates your sexual desires. And if you look nowadays what's happening, the most prevalent theme nowadays in music is what? It's all based around haram zina. Right? They're treating women as objects. Most music artists, what are they talking about? Haram, zina, illicit fornication. So what are they doing? They're combining this music with illicit intercourse, right? So now what's happening? Your body is getting addicted to that, used to that. So this is why the early Muslim scholar, Fulayh ibn Iyad, right? He says something very interesting. He says, Al-Ghina, the music is a prelude, it's an early step to zina. That when a person, he starts listening to music, after music what happens? You start dancing. After dancing, you'll see in the hadith of Rasulullah we'll discuss. After dancing, you start leading to other actions. Why? Because your body wants more. So now, after dancing, now you start getting attracted to the opposite sex if you see someone else dancing. Right? That's natural. Your natural disposition starts kicking in. So now you're letting your nafs kick in. And then after that, you start looking at haram. And then you start thinking about haram. And then eventually you do the haram action. So this is what music does to us, right? It makes it such where that it's attacking our nafs. It's attacking our nafs al-amara, our evil desires that we have inside of us, right? Another thing which is very scary about music, right? These are all scientific, I'm talking about the scientific harms, is there's something in the body known as endorphins. Anyone know what endorphins is or no? Endorphins. So endorphins is such where when you have an accident or you have a trauma, it's a natural response in our body, painkiller pretty much. It tries to reduce the pain. So what does music do? Music activates that endorphin. What does that mean? That means when you're listening to music, you feel good. But what's the problem? You're feeling good, but it's only for that short time. It's only for that short term. So as long as the music is playing, your body is reacting, it's activating that endorphin, and you're feeling good. Right? This leads a person to, again, go back to the whole aspect of addiction. So now you're addicted. Your body is feeling good, it's numbing the pain. Right? And then we're going to discuss this. All this is useless. Right? It's a distraction from the path of Allah Azza wa Jal. It's a diversion from the path of Allah Azza wa Jal. We'll discuss it, you'll see how harmful it is, right? And then so that's what it does to you. It activates our part. Just like how every single one of us, we need food in our body. Just like how we need food, we also need spiritual food. An example, what does Rasulullah teach us? مَثَلُ الَّذِي يَذْكُرُ رَبَّهُ وَالَّذِي لَا يَذْكُرُ كَمَثَلِ الْحَيِّ وَالْمَيِّتِ. That the one who remembers their Lord with the dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jalla, and the one who doesn't remember the Lord is like the example of the living and the dead. So just like how we have physical food, dhikr is the spiritual food for our heart. The more we do the dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jalla, the more we remember Allah Azza wa Jalla, the more our hearts are spiritually alive. The more we are feeding the spiritual side of our heart. But Rasulullah says that the heart which doesn't have any dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jalla, the heart which doesn't have any remembrance of Allah Azza wa Jalla is like a dead heart. So now this music, it is temporary, giving us a feeling that we have good, but what is that? That's like junk food. As we have over here, the little kids, right? We have Cheetos, we have Gatorade, all that thing soda is junk food, right? So even though it's giving us some enjoyment, but in reality that has complete harm for you. So similarly, in regards to music, music is the junk food for the soul. That you might be feeling good, but there's no good in that. Right? It destroys a person's spiritual strength. Not only that, it puts a person in a state of self-delusion. And what is self-delusion? Self-delusion is very important, right? That when you say this, is a person doesn't necessarily know what he's doing. Ibn al-Qayyim, very important, he mentions two diseases of the heart. Right? He mentions the heart you can categorize the diseases of the heart into two categories. Number one is diseases of the doubt. What does that mean? That doubt creeps into a person's heart. So now the level of his faith starts decreasing. Right? When does this happen? When does doubt come into your heart? This is when hypocrisy is nurtured in the heart. This is when nifaq is brought into the heart. And listening to music causes hypocrisy to come into your heart. So now what's happening is, doubt is being put into your heart. And we're going to discuss, when the spiritual harms are discussed, we're going to see, what do we mean when your heart is put in doubt? What do we say the disease of doubt? What does this mean? Right? That's number one. Number two is the disease of desire. This happens when the heart, when our spiritual side, it succumbs to our lowly desires. Right? Every single person of us has a nafs. Allah says in the Quran, وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ. Every single person has the evil side to their nafs. But the one who takes care of that spiritual side is a successful person. But the one who succumbs to his desires then he is in a state of loss. Right? He's in a state of self-delusion. And that's what happens, right? On the day of judgment. On the day of judgment, Allah Ta'ala says, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ. On the day of judgment, no money, no children, nothing will help that person. إِلَّا, what's the author say? إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. The only person who will be able to be successful on the day of judgment is the one who comes to Allah with a sound heart. The one who comes to Allah with a safe heart. But this very music, when we start listening to it, it destroys our heart. It destroys the spiritual side of our heart. So this is what music does to it, right? Where Allah is saying that إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ, that the one who comes to Allah on the day of judgment with a sound heart, he is guaranteed Jannah. He will get Jannah. But what happens with music is it attacks our spiritual heart, right? And then that's what it is. So now your heart is spiritually dead. And then how are you going to come to Allah on the day of judgment with all this filth inside of your heart, right? Rasulullah mentioned in the hadith that every single one of us, there's a specific part in the body that if you take care of that body, if you take care of that morsel, then your whole body is sound. But if you don't care of that specific morsel, then your whole body, your whole actions, everything about you is astray. It's destroyed. Allah will heal the qalb. And then the Nabi Kareem also mentioned it is the heart. So safeguarding the heart is a prime responsibility. It's a extreme responsibility for us Muslims, right? Another thing, very, very interesting, going back to the scientific harms of music, is hypnosis, right? Does anyone know what hypnosis is over here or no? Hypnosis. What is hypnosis?
When you trick the mind into doing something.
Right, so it's pretty much like tricking the mind. I didn't say tricking the mind. It's you're putting yourself in a weak state, in a vulnerable state. And what is hypnosis? All you're doing is repetition, right? So if you see nowadays, you have these people. It's all, I want to say it's phony, but you have people nowadays. They're sitting there and they're trying to hypnotize someone, right? What are they doing? And what is the art of hypnosis? Is repetition. So they just start repeating some things over and over again. So they're saying the same thing over and over again. This is repetition. And if you look, what is music? Music is also repetition. It's repetitive. It has a beat to it. And it's a hypnotic beat. Right? If you look at music, they have a chorus. And that repeats 2 or 3 times in a song. And it's repetitive, right? And this is very scary. Why? Because now, when you keep hearing that repetitive things, you become very vulnerable. In other words, you're putting yourself in a suggestive hypnosis, where your mind is subconsciously open to what's being said to you. And now, take that song, and imagine if that song has haram lyrics inside of it, which is 99% of the times the music nowadays is haram lyrics. That is being put into your subconscious. That message is being put into your mind, right? And you don't even know it. And a lot of the times, what's unfortunate, if you look at rock and roll, that genre, majority of the lyrics regarding that is all kufr. So now you're sitting there, and those brothers, if there's any sisters who listen to Bollywood, they're not safe either. Why? Because the lyrics in those songs also, a lot of it is kufr. Right? They're talking about their idols and stuff like that. And now your brain is addicted to it, and you're listening to it, and you're enjoying it, and you're waiting for that beat to drop, right? And you're in that state, and you're in that trance. But you don't necessarily know that what's being said, what's being put into your brain, is all kufr. Right? That subconscious message is all kufr. And that is short-term and long-term memory. Right? You know what short-term is? Something that you remember right now. Long-term memory is for the memory later. What happens? How do you gain from short-term to long-term memory? Anyone know? Repetition. And that's what music is all about. Repeating, so it stays with you. That's why even if you ask me, I still remember the songs I used to listen to when I was 10 years old. All the lyrics. I can throw the gang signs up, I can throw everything up, right? I still remember everything in detail. It's unfortunate. Why? Because it became part of my subconscious. It changed the way I thought. It became part of me. And all that repetition is staying with me in my long-term memory. And that's what happens. Sometimes you're sitting there and you're like, wait a second. I can't remember my childhood, but I'm able to remember this specific song. And then you hear that song in the Dunkin' Donuts, or you hear that song in the elevator, and you're like, wait. It makes you feel like nostalgia. That's what it did to you. That's unfortunate, right? It reminds you of something. It hits you, you feel different. It reminds you of your childhood. So this is music. That's what it's doing to you. Right now you remember everything, and it's sad. Right? What's very sad is, right, that when Shaitan was kicked out from Jannah, what happened? Right? What are the 5 senses? Anyone know what the 5 senses are? The 5 senses. What are the 5 senses?
Me?
Yeah.
Touch, smell, taste, and hearing
Okay, so that's correct. So we said the five senses, right? It's what? It's the sense of taste, touch, smell, hearing, and seeing. Amongst these five senses, even psychologists and even the Sharia, which was very interesting, is the two that are the most prevalent, and the rest are secondary, is seeing and hearing. Right? So even the five senses, the two primary ones are seeing and seeing something and hearing something. Now, between these two, between seeing and hearing, the most prevalent one and the most dominant one is hearing. Why? You can only see linear. Linear means straight. I can't see backwards. I can't see sideways. I can't see sideways, right? You can only see straight. But now when it comes to hearing, it's circular. You can hear everywhere. You know, right? Similarly, when it comes to seeing, when your eyes are closed, you can't see anything anymore. But when it comes to hearing, even if your eyes are closed, you can hear. Also, when a person is sleeping, his seeing, his sense of seeing is kind of gone, right? It's at a low. But his hearing is always there. If you make up like that, the person wakes up. So, that's very interesting that hearing is a prevalent feature, sense that we have as human beings. That's why Allah mentions the word sama in the Quran before al-basar. So if you look at the Quran, Allah says, Inna sabra wal basara wal fu'ad. All the times in the Quran, it's a fun fact for you. If you look at the Quran, every time sama, basar, seeing, hearing, and the heart is mentioned, all the time, the seeing part, the hearing part will be always mentioned before seeing. So Allah says, هو الذي أنشأكم من Allah says in the Quran, إن السمع والبصر. Allah is saying that your hearing, your seeing, and your heart, Allah asks you regarding that. So that's just a fun fact for you. That seeing, hearing is always mentioned before seeing. And when Shaitan was kicked out from Jannah, what did Allah say to him? وَاسْتَفْزِزْ مَنِ اسْتَطَعْتَ مِنْهُمْ بِصَوْتِكَ. That whoever you're able to take over, whoever you're able to lead astray with your voice, then by all means you can try to. And what is the voice of Shaitan? What is the voice? Mufassir mentioned, it is ghina, it is the music. It is singing, it is music. So this is the voice of Shaitan, that Shaitan is trying to remove us from the path of Allah, right? That he is trying to divert us from the path of Allah. It's Ibn al-Jawzi mentions that if you have music in the heart, what's the problem? Number one, it diverts the heart from the remembrance of Allah. And this is unfortunate, it's sad reality. The people who listen to music, when the Quran is played, what happens? They find it annoying. They find it like turn this off. Right? But when they listen to music, they're in the zone, right? And when they're calmed down, they're listening to music. But they never listen to the Quran. Right? Because now what's happening is you're leading yourself astray from the path of Allah. So now Quran becomes annoying for you. Listening to the hadith of Rasul becomes annoying for you. Because why? The Quran, the music that you're listening to is diverting you from the path of Allah, the remembrance of Allah. And number two, the harm of music, it gives a person the love for the materialistic pleasures of the dunya. The more you start listening to the music, the more you start becoming in love with the dunya. Right? Dunya. And now you're in that trap of following the dunya and having the materials of the dunya. Allah says, وَمَنْ حَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا مَتَاعُ الْغُرُورِ. That this dunya is a mere deception, right? Mata, temporary benefit, and then you gotta go. وَمَنْ حَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا مَتَاعُ الْغُرُورِ. So this is what music does to you. It diverts the heart from the remembrance of Allah. And what's sad is, and we're going to discuss this next point, is in regards to hypocrisy, right? Ibn Masudi narrates that al-ghina yumbitu nifaq fil qalbi kama yumbitu al-ma'u zar'a, right? He's saying that when a person listens to music, singing, what happens? It creates hypocrisy in the heart. What is hypocrisy? When you say hypocrite, right? Hypocrisy means that in reality you're saying something, but downwards something else is in your heart. Right? That's what the characteristics of the munafiqun were at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That was true, you're seeing it as haq. Or you're seeing truthness as false, and you're seeing false as truth. And that's what's happening nowadays. Unfortunately, alhamdulillah, I don't have social media or any social platforms. But what's sad is people nowadays, what they're doing on Snapchat, they're recording Muslims dancing. That's okay, let's leave that aside. But not only that, they're saying, mashallah, so nice. They're using the name of Allah, and this is what hypocrisy is. You don't know what's happening, what's taking place in your heart. What you're doing is, you're saying what the people are doing and you're okay with that. Isn't this a form of hypocrisy? That they're Muslims in the wedding, they're dancing, and they say, mashallah, so nice. They use the name of Allah. This is what's happening in the hearts of a person. person, he doesn't know what's wrong. He doesn't know what's right, but he's doing it. He sees what the society is doing, and he's following with that also, right? So that's what happens, unfortunately, right? It distracts the heart. It prevents it from contemplating the Quran of Allah Azza wa Jalla, right? It also, because why? You have haqq and you have batil. Just like how you can't have vinegar and water in the same bottle, you can't have haqq and batil in the same heart. So you have Allah on one side calling you to worship Allah Azza wa Jalla. Leave your nafs. Leave everything. And then then worship Allah Azza wa Jalla. Then on the other side, you have shaitan. And shaitan is saying, don't follow Allah Azza wa Jalla. Shaitan is saying, follow your nafs. Follow what your nafs is telling you. Follow your nafs, and that's what music does to you. So this can never coincide in the heart. So that's why you see, ihdina siratal mustaqim, right? Always be on the straight path. It's either this way or this way. That's why music can never, that's why it's sad what happens. When music is into your heart, and it just overwhelms you, it takes it. And I didn't mention this, and I'll mention this, is scientists, they mentioned that there's 3 ways you brainwash a person. You know brainwashing? You pretty much try to overtake their brain. And there's a program for that. And if you look into history, right? If you look into history, when the non-Muslims colonized the Muslims, they didn't necessarily attack them through physical warfare. Sometimes they used mental warfare. And that's what we're facing nowadays, mental warfare, right? It's not all about going out there with fighting literally, but it's also about mental spiritual warfare. So they say there's 3 elements when it comes to brainwashing someone. Number 1 is physical and mental exhaustion, right? Making a person physically and mentally weak, right? Number 2 is repetition. And number 3 is slogans, right? Catchy slogans, Nike, just do it, right? Or feel the thirst. Right? These things are now, unfortunately, inshallah, I have a plan, make dua, I have a program, I have plans to do another program regarding homosexuality. Right? I was last month, and I mentioned this in the program, I was there, that I didn't know June was the Pride Month. But this is spreading nowadays in society, amongst Muslims also. Everywhere you look, this is now the next problem that's we're facing, pride. Right? And now they have nice slogans attached to it. Be yourself. Right? Come out of the closet. And everyone's supporting them. So these are slogans that they put out there to attract the new people. So this is one of the methods you use in regards to brainwashing. And music has all this inside of it. When we're physically and mentally exhausted, what happens? Throw in the AirPods and start listening to music. And then the repetition, 2-hour gym music, repeating, and you're in the zone, right? And now you're getting in the zone. It's giving you that hype. Number 3 is slogans. They put that nice catchphrases. You have those rappers throwing up their signs and their things, and that's what happens. So now your brain is being attached and subconsciously attached to the music, right? So this is what it is, and this is why the more we go to that path, the more our heart becomes disinclined towards the path of Allah Azza wa Jalla. And finally, I'll just mention that we have to combat that. How do we combat this? Is number 1, alhamdulillah, now we're learning, and this is just the beginning, touching the surface. Number 1 is coming back to Allah Azza wa Jalla, right? The more we do sin, the more our heart becomes darker, right? And we can mention every time a person does sin, a dark spot is put in his heart. And then it gets darker, and darker, and darker, and darker, and darker, and darker. And then what's happening is now, you're letting your nafs take over, and that's giving you wrong decisions. And Allah addresses the people in the Quran, أُولَٰئِكَ الْأَنْعَامُ وَالْأَضَلُّ, that they have the aql, but they act like animals. Rather, they're worse than animals, because they're letting the nafs take over them. Right? That's number 1. That's what happens. So that's why, in order for us to counter that, we immediately make tawbah to Allah Azza wa Jalla. Right? We make tawbah to Allah Azza wa Jalla. That we come back to Allah Azza wa Jalla. That every time we make a sin, we make tawbah, and then what happens? Our heart is purified. That's number 1. Number 2 is more Quran. Right? We need to have the recitation of the Quran inside of us. Right? We need to understand what is truth and what is batil. It's very difficult for when a person living his whole life listening to music, it's addiction. It becomes an addiction, and it stays with you throughout your life. But when you come back and you make tawbah to Allah Azza wa Jal, then Allah is the one who controls your heart, and He will bring it back to you. And He will that heart, that spirituality inside of you. Sometimes we have that we don't necessarily, when we do ibadah, we're not feeling it. Right? Sometimes we're doing a form of action, we're not feeling it. Why? It's because we have so much filth inside of us that it's preventing us from feeling the halal of Iman, the fruits of Iman. Right? So this is what it is in regards to music. Right? So that's what it is. If you look at society nowadays, and that was my point of mentioning that as Muslims, we have to stand for what's right, and we have to go against what's batil. And Nabi Kareem mentioned the hadith, لَيَكُونَنَّ مِنْ أُمَّةِ أَقْوَامًا يَسْتَحِلُّ الْحِلْ وَالْحَرِيرُ وَالْخَمْرَ وَالْمَعَازِفِ. That a time will come in my nation. Nabi Kareem mentions that these people, and another narration mentions zina also, a group of people will try to make silk permissible for the men. They will try to make khamr, drinking permissible for the people. They'll also try to make ma'azif, musical instruments, permissible for the people. Right? And that's what's happening nowadays, is society is saying what's wrong with it. What's wrong with music? Right? Now, the problem is that you yourself listening to music, you can't necessarily tell what's right and what's wrong, and now you say what's wrong with it. Right? That's what's happening. And that's what Nabi Kareem prophesied 1400 years ago, that a time will come where people will try to say it's permissible. Right? So, I didn't even go into the fiqh side of it, the fiqh haythiyah, but just a bit, all four scholars are unanimous that music is haram, right? And then, let's say there are some differences of opinion. The music nowadays is completely haram, right? What is the songs nowadays? What do they consist of? What are they talking about? It's all connected to each other. It's talking about following your nafs, it's talking about drinking, and it's talking about having illicit relationships. And this very three things that the music nowadays targets, the audience it targets, was prophesied by Nabi Kareem in one hadith. He mentioned all these three things in one hadith that I just mentioned to you right now. He mentioned khamr, drinking, he mentioned illicit relationships, and he also mentioned music. And what's now the music that's being portrayed out there, what is that music consisting of? It's consisting of having going out with people. It's consisting of drinking. They put the alcohol in fancy music videos, and they make it such where it's wow and lavish. And then having the woman and the dancing. This is the music nowadays. This is halal completely. There's no difference in opinion regarding it. And then sadly, like I mentioned, is what message is it bringing to the youth. Forget the Kufi message. What about the message of just your daily life? That it's okay to do certain things. And that's what happens. We fall into this trap of these people, and then we're following their lifestyle. And then these people are considered our role models. These people are considered people who we want to respect in society. And people who follow religion, the people who have religion side of them, we don't like them. Right? If you now, I don't want to be brutal, but I'll end off with this and say, if someone announced right now that let's take a YouTube celebrity was coming to a certain place, that place will be filled, right? But now when there's a program being mentioned, the masjid is hard to find people in the masjid. Right? So now this is society, we have to combat this. Right? If you look, there's a picture that came out that they're restricting the Kaaba for people coming to the Kaaba, but when it comes to concerts, the place is full. And now society is saying this is okay. Right? Society respects those people. When it comes to this is something we don't want to go to. Why? We have to ask ourselves what's in our heart. So that's why I mentioned every single one of us sitting here, honestly, we're not judging anyone else, but everyone sitting here, it's a tawfiq from Allah that we are able to sit here. It's a blessing from Allah that we're able to sit here. Right? And that He gave us tawfiq to come and remember Allah Azza wa Jalla. So this is a reminder for all of us. And this is why I spoke about this topic, that in order for us to combat it, we have to educate ourselves. Right? In regards to the scientific and spiritual harms of music. There's no benefits. Even if you have a slight benefit, you might feel good. Right? When the khamr was being made haram, Allah originally first said that, okay, it has some benefit to it, but majority of it is useless. So same thing with music. Even if you might have that feeling, that I'm enjoying it, but what happens? Now you're listening to it more and more and more and more. So I'll end off with that, and I'll say that Allah give us the thing to realize the harms of music. Educate ourselves in regards to the harms of music, that it's in our society, it's part of us, right? And that's why it's hard. That's the thing of shaitan. What stops this man is to whoever you can, overpower with your voice. And the voice of shaitan is music. And the music is such where we have to leave that place completely. If we're in the elevator, we have to close our ears. And that's, as a Muslim, that's what we have to do. Right? And we didn't go that much into the fiqh bahath, because fiqh bahath is something which is, I'm not necessarily qualified for it, and but it was unanimous. If you were talking about the music nowadays, it's completely haram. There's no difference of opinion regarding the music nowadays. All right. So any questions? We'll end off, inshallah. Yes.
What would you say about those people? They listen to poetry, but they don't have instruments, and it has topics of deen in it.
Yeah. So in regards to poetry itself, there was a it says in the Quran that even in the Arabs at the time, they had the habit of poetry, right? They had the habit of poetry. But now if that poetry itself, if a man is saying it, it's consistent of nothing beneficial, that's considered as lahu, right? As something which is frivolous, useless. But you also have Muslims in themselves, scholars, who also have this concept of poetry. And their poetry was what? Mother, praise of the Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, or bringing people back to Allah Azza wa Jalla, right? So poetry in itself, if there's just music, not music, if there's a person's voice, it's fine. As long as it's relevant topics. But now if a person just poetry and he's just saying some things, that is not necessarily haram, but if it'll be something which is lahu al-ilm, meaning it's a waste of time, right? But in regards to that poetry, which you have the Qasida Burda, it's a famous share which was in praise of the Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. That's completely fine, and that's actually something which revives us. That also, right, the Quran itself, just like how music affects our heart, Quran also affects our heart spiritually. Never forget that. The Kalam of Allah will always affect our, sometimes you have that physical stimuli. When the Qari, he hits that famous verse, and then you just go, whoa, right? And you go, yes. That's the Quran scientifically having an impact on our hearts and our body. So the same thing with music also does that also. Any other questions? So may Allah give us tawfiq, I don't know as we said, may Allah give us tawfiq to understand the harms of music and refrain from the harms of music and come back to Allah. Right? All the time you have to make tawbah, realizing that it's haram. If something is haram and you can't realize it, that's a problem. Right? If you're still okay with it, that's a problem. Allah says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. That Allah will not change a nation until that nation is going to change themselves. So if we can't recognize a problem, if people don't like to hear this, that's a problem. Right? If saying this is something that causes controversy, that's a problem. And what's the problem? That's a society's problem. We have to work on that. Right? Yes, sir.
Sorry, one more question. A lot of people say that dub, like a type of drum, is
Yeah.
permissible. Like, what's the information on that?
Yeah, so I didn't discuss that, but in regards to daf, right? You have the hadith of Rasulullah in certain situations that allow for, like, for example, in nikah, right? So the daf itself is a specific instrument that was allowed in Sharia, and not the ones that you have nowadays in regards to the jingles on the side and the bells, but just a daf which is one-sided, and it's just used in certain situations. But generally speaking, it was allowed slightly, right, in certain situations. But majority of the times, other things like bells and the flute, all these things were made haram. But the daf is not the drum that we have nowadays. It's a completely different thing, right? So daf is allowed in certain situations, right? Yes.
What about like the humming in the background that like mimics instruments?
In regards to nowadays, so you do have machines nowadays, which they have like the vocals and stuff like that. So again, the voice of a person, not a female's voice, I'm talking about a male's voice, right? A male's voice itself, there's nothing necessarily wrong with it, right? It's something, the nasheeds, what they do is the same thing. They're trying to get a person to get addicted to it, right? So that humming itself is not, some scholars will say it's not permissible, but some scholars will say that it's there just to, like, bring that beat to the nasheed, right? Or bring that humming. And that's what music does. It actually tries to hum and mimic the voice of a person, right? So I can't necessarily say there's two scholars in the field. If I say something wrong, and Shaykh also here, if I say something wrong, they can correct me. But the humming of a man is okay, right? It's in the sheet. It is something that is preferred. I don't necessarily think something preferred, right?
So actually, adding on to that question, right? There are like two types of like nasheeds nowadays. There's like the nasheeds where the vocals are imitating a musical instrument, right? There's that, and there's also like a very light vocals, like a little beat. So
So nowadays you have those nasheeds that are taking place, which is completely like beatboxing, right?
Yes.
So since it's the voice, right? If it comes to such a point where it ends up, right? You can't necessarily say that it's haram, but you can say that it's something which is not necessarily beneficial, right? And then if you have the light vocals, the best will be is just pure voice. Not necessarily now you have a hole in the background, someone's in the background just beatboxing. But this is again, the reason for this, I understand where they're coming from, right? When Rasulullah, if you look at the way Khamar became haram, it wasn't something right away, right? Khamar in the Quran, it was a 3-step process. Why? Because the Sahaba at that time and the Arabs at that time were completely involved in Khamar. So in order for them to come out of it, right, they needed to take a gradual process. So now people who have a problem with listening to music, they need something to like slowly get them out of it. So people maybe when they do that, they have like this mindset, okay, we can't necessarily say it's haram right now. We say it's haram, but for them to come out of it, it's a process. So they do these things to slowly get them out, right? People who have cigarettes, the way they get out of it is e-cigarettes. And then eventually, it gets them out of smoking completely. So this is just a way for us to get away from the actual music, and then eventually come back to the kalam of Allah. It's like a middleman. So you can't necessarily say it's haram, but it's something which is not necessary. It's not something which is, there's no benefit to it, right? That's what it is. Yeah.
I have another question.
Yeah.
So nowadays there are like
There's scholars here, so if I say something wrong, you can say, I'm not gonna get angry, I'm not perfect, you know? Shaykh can say also, and then someone also, he's gonna, yeah, I'm on.
So nowadays there are these Islamic music videos.
Yeah.
They're musical,
Yeah.
but they have like Allah Azza wa Jall's names, but they're like tuned to still musical
Are you talking about instruments or no?
instruments. Yes.
So that's the, see, this is the prophecy of Rasulullah. They're using the name of Allah in musical instruments. That's the prophecy of Rasulullah. And I give that example, right? You have people and they're backing it. They'll make it halal, right? Deen squad.
Yes.
I'm not judging anyone, but that's one example. I'm not passing a fatwa against anyone, right? I'm not going to label who I label, but I'm just saying that people will come. Well, they'll literally take a kafir song, they'll change the lyrics, but the beats are there. Right? And that's the same thing. So you don't need that. That's ma'azif. These are all instruments, and musical instruments, but all of them except the dove is haram. It's completely haram. You understand? Yeah. That's no worries.
So in regards to the music videos, I mean nasheeds, which imitate like where the vocals imitate the instruments, right? Would you say that's deceptive, and like could that be ruled as something else then?
Again, I mean the vocals itself, right? It's just they're trying to find a way so that they can counter the music with the beats and try to imitate with your voice, right? So it's just a way to catch someone's attention, right? I mean, it's a person's voice, so you can't necessarily say a person's voice right now speaking is haram. You can double check with me afterwards, and then there's also scholars, you can ask them again. But what specifically regards to that's haram. That's why you see the sheep with in India or Pakistan, it's just the person saying the and people find that boring, right? They're like, what is this, you know? But it's just poetry. But the music that we have, the music we have nowadays is more than a hit, right? So yeah.
Does that include auto-tune?
Auto-tune?
Auto-tune.
This is all auto-tune. This is all again useless ways. This is just ways of people trying to gain the attention of the people, right?
But it's not necessarily haram. It's just not.
So what is something haram? Something which is lahu and na'ib, right? Musical instruments are completely haram, right? Auto-tune is just a person changing his voice. That's useless. That's just a useless thing. Right? If eventually you can, so that's why you can't say it's haram, but it's something frivolous, useless. And right? Leaving something which is useless and frivolous is the beauty of Islam. So just completely leaving it is the best thing. Right? That's why the best will be listen to Quran. Yeah.
I'm sorry, last
No, go ahead.
Is there music in Jannah?
There can be anything in Jannah, whatever you want in Jannah.
So it's halal and like how wine?
Just like how wine will be permissible in Jannah, whatever type of music you want will be permissible there. Or whatever you want over there. I'm not in Jannah, so I can't really tell you, you know? So. Any other questions? The food has come, now it's time to eat, inshallah, you know? So, Jazakallah khair for Shaykh Aqib and also for all of yes.
Sorry, I just had a question.
Yeah.
I had an encounter with a friend, and I was trying to explain to him how instruments are haram, like it's against our religion.
What is it?
Instruments are against our religion,
Okay.
so because like thing is, like the voice is okay because it's natural. So then he's telling me, but a guitar is like made from natural things. So like, I don't know how to.
I mean, it doesn't matter if it's made from natural things, you know, like Hamoon is made from natural things also. You're gonna say, now since it's natural, everything that we have is made from natural systems. It's just what the hadith mentioned, right? So this is what people try to do. They're trying to use their logic against the nusus, the Quran and hadith, right? So you know if something's made from natural substances, maybe it makes it haram. You understand? So you can counter him saying, what about Hamoon? It's also made from water, you know, natural grapes and stuff. So you're gonna say that's all also? So that's how you counter him. Yes?
Is pork gonna be halal in Jannah?
Pork gonna be halal in Jannah? Haram? Oh, haram in Jannah. Why you like pork? No, it's good. So in Jannah, if you like it, we'll have something better for you in Jannah, inshallah. Something better, inshallah, right? Better than Jannah. Inshallah. No, something better, inshallah. Alright, inshallah. We'll end off, inshallah, the food's here, brothers. Alhamdulillah, I'm here on behalf of the Al-Hikmah Institute. So Al-Hikmah Institute is something we started, and it's pretty much this, you know, giving programs. Our philosophy is learning, practicing, and spreading, right? This is our philosophy, and this is what the big cases of assembly, learning, practicing, and spreading. So Al-Hikmah Institute, and I just once again I thank Shaykh Aqib and the community for allowing me to come and give this program, inshallah. more programs. This is what we need, right? We need more programs, the community's involvement. We need the masjid to be populated, right? Full. And this is, we get to be one. Al-Dar al-Fa'ili, Al-Dar al-Fa'ili. The one who indicates towards good is the one who does the good. So spread the word, inshallah, Al-Hikmah Institute and JMCY Youth, inshallah. سبحان الله وبحمده سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد ان لا اله الا انت نستغفرك ونتوب اليك.